Hey there guys, DMO73 here, bringing you the first feature match of 2018. Woo! I am playing the Anti-Ayu Ayu list that was created by Josh Boersma and won my Ayu only, patrons only tournament for December. He also received a judge feasting for that win. If you are interested in participating in those monthly tournaments, you can sign up to support the channel on Patreon. It's only $1 a month minimum. Gets you access to the Discord server and all the cool perks that come with it, like tournaments, free tournaments, and all kinds of other fun stuff. So if you feel like checking that out, link at the end of the video as well as in the description. I'm playing against Trey, who is piloting his Dark Tree control list. It's been slightly updated since the last time you've seen it, but it is pretty close to the way it was before, so we're not going to do a full deck profile on it. However, at the end of the video, we are going to be seeing how he sideboarded against Ayu. Now, this Ayu list is very different than traditional Ayu lists you've seen going around, as it is designed to be a mirror breaker. As such, its game 1 versus other matchups isn't necessarily quite as good, and you kind of sometimes need to rely on your sideboard and knowing when to scoop in game 1 in order to make that a viable option, so you have enough time, especially against decks like Dark Tree, which can really grind the game out for sure. So we've already rolled the die, and I'm going to be on the draw. I'm trying to take the time to shuffle that massive deck of Dark Tree control. Trey has kind of tried to prioritize the Neo Barrier in this format. Neo Barrier of Shadows, I think, is a very strong tool for Dark Tree, being able to shut down Mana Dorks, Mariabellas, even something like Fairer, eventually, if you can get the Dark Alice on the board. I definitely think that there are a lot of options for it, so we'll just have to see how this goes. Ayu, most of the time against Dark Tree just by itself, is probably going to want to focus on kind of chip damage as opposed to a full massive amount of damage in one swing, mainly because of the fact that Tree has so many cards in its deck to try to exile all at once, and Ayu can't really possibly just in one swing deal all that damage, at least consistently. So you want to kind of whittle your opponent down and pick the right kind of moments to swing so that you can kind of keep the pressure up, and whilst also maintaining the advantage over the Tree player who might not have too many cards in their hand. So I'm going to go ahead and mulligan. Thinking about how many cards I want to mulligan here, it is very tricky to mulligan with Ayu, as every card is a singleton, so if you don't have a way to search that card or shuffle your deck consistently, you're probably never going to see that card again, so you just have to kind of admit to it. Beginning of the game, I get to draw a card, so I start at 6 cards. Being on the draw, this means I'm going to get to start the game with 7 cards, technically, which is pretty nice. Turn 1, Scorn of Dark Alice. Only have 2 Resonators for him to grab, a Faria and a Valorous Tiger Spirit. Hits the Valorous Tiger, which is a little unfortunate, but I do have ways to bring spirits back, so it's not too bad. Hit my Ayu. I'm going to go ahead and Scorn him back, mainly because I want to try to see if I can get a Rezard out of his hand or a Dark Alice. I happen to hit that Lapis, which is actually pretty good for me. Pretty happy about that. I also have good information on the fact that he has a cancel spell in his hand in the form of Otherworld Dreams, but no Separate Winds to back it up. Don't mind me forgetting to move that Scorn of Dark Alice off the field. I am going to catch it here eventually. Just kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit and forgot to clear it off the board. So again, it's just going to sit there for a minute, but I promise I do clear it off the board here in a little bit. Call for another stone, hit that Hearth's Core, decide to pass the turn myself. No real reason to play any cards right now. I don't have the will to be able to play the Faria, and I want to hold on to the Bird Spirit in my hand. Out comes that Rezard. And then he's going to go ahead and pass the turn. At the end of the turn, I'm going to go ahead and use Ayu's Sword Strike on the Rezard. I could use the Lightning Strike, which might be easier, but he does have access to be able to exile 1 card, so he would be a 6/6, and I don't want that to happen, so I want Sword Strike to just guarantee kill him. He decides not to use the Paying 200 in response for exiling my Tiger, which I think is a little bit interesting, but still he decides to go ahead with that. And then at the end of his turn, I'm also going to go ahead and Lightning Strike his face. Hit a few more cards in the RFG, thankfully. Hit a Dark Alice, but I don't hit a Rezard, so I still keep him kind of out of play. Here's where I start to notice, oh wait, I have this Scorn of Dark Alice. It's sitting on my board. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to play this Sylvia here. He says, sure, that's fine. Thinking about whether or not to cancel it. Decides to go ahead and play the Otherworld Dreams. Since I get to cast the second card here, I'm going to go ahead and cast the Release for free. I get to draw. It lets me draw a card. I could have cast the Spider's Web, but I have Will for Spider's Web. I also, so I can use it later if I need to. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and play this Gate of the Silver Key, which will make Ayu be able to Judgment for 1, which is very good for her. It's one of the 2 key additions that Ayu makes really good use of, the second being Power Medicine, so you can Judgment for 1 and then ramp a stone, so your Judgment becomes essentially free. He's going to play a Release himself. It lets him get back the Scorn of Dark Alice. He's going to keep trying to rip my hand apart here. Gets to draw a card off of it. He's going to follow it up with the Scorn. He can take the Spirit or the Faria. I have a Spider's Web in my hand. Chooses to hit the Spirit. Not terribly too concerned about losing Resonators, as I do have the Spider's Web for Recursion, which is pretty nice. I also can bring a lot of creatures to my hand just by using Judgment from Ayu. Go into my deck to grab a Spirit. Grab the Misty Dragon Spirit into my hand, so that next turn I could call Stone and play Misty Dragon. Misty Dragon is a very strong card, even in its own right. Goes ahead and recovers, calls for a stone, hits a Shadowy Light Stone. So now he's looking at a lot of spells. He has that Dark Red Riding Hood in his hand. He has that Final Battle, but that's kind of pointless against Ayu since she has the Imperishable and he'd have to pay a lot of life to be able to do it. And I can just proceed to flip for 1 again. Doesn't really do much for him. I'm sitting on that Final Breeze, which feels pretty comfortable, so that I can stop anything that I'm terribly concerned about. He plays specifically a Final Battle. If he chooses to try to pay a bunch of life, the thought would be to Final Battle, put it back in his hand, and make all that life that he spent wasted. Plays that Dark Red Riding Hood, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm pretty sure that's fine. It can't really affect me right now. It doesn't have any mystery counters. His life total's not high enough that he's going to really hurt me for anything, and my Ayu is stronger than his is. So I'm pretty okay with it. At the end of his turn, so before I've actually seen that draw card, I catch myself here. I'm going to cast the Spider's Web and attempt to bring back the the Valorous Tiger Spirit, actually, because I have the Mystery Dragon in my hand, and then I'll recover for the turn. Now in my hand, I have a lot of different options. I decided to go ahead and pump up and give some flying and swing in for that 15 damage. I don't necessarily know if this was the right call to make here. I could have easily just called for stone and tried to progress a little bit more. Maybe even played the Valorous Tiger or just played the Misty and got it into play. I do know he plays the Otherworld Dream, so that's a little bit of a problem. But the thing that I could do is, especially because of his stone base, is I could tap for stone, play the Valorous Tiger, and then if he cancels it, I can play the Misty Dragon, which then is pretty good. The other problem is, though, is he has Final Battle, and Final Battle is one of the few cards that actually can deal with Misty Dragon Spirit, because even if I exile it, then he can just, when it comes back into play at the end of the turn, it still gets the stat neg, which is, therefore makes Misty Dragon Spirit completely worthless. So he decides to play the Grim here, which is used to pop the gate, which is pretty smart because I'm pretty low on stones right now. So now he can like follow it up with like trying to kill Dark Red Riding Hood, or he can try to kill Ayu, send me even further back, or just leave Ayu where she is and kind of force me to be in a weird position if I try to call for stone with him having 2 creatures. The shuffling of the deck there is because of a mandatory search shuffle from Grim. He has to try to go find a Fairy Tale if he pops an addition. He doesn't have one, but he still has to shuffle the deck. he's thinking about exactly what he wants to do here. He's got that final battle in his hand. He's got a Heteroclite Excalibur and double Otherworld Dreams at this point. So we're kind of even on card advantage here, but he's got a lot of cancels in his back pocket. He makes a pretty interesting play line here. So he uses Dark Red Riding Hood. He's thinking about whether or not to swing and where to swing it specifically. He's got that final battle in his hand. So what he could do here, which would be probably the safest bet, is to pay to just give a slight neg to Ayu, so that even if I try to discard for pump, that I can pitch in against the Ayu here. So he trades the Red Riding Hood into the Ayu and then says, I'm going to do the final battle. Now I have the Final Breeze in my hand here, so what I could do is I could try to cancel it, force him into pay life, and spend one of his other counters. But my reasoning is, I know he has Otherworld Dreams, so he can just counter it. And at which point I would have to choose to possibly put in a 2-drop, which would then just get killed by Final Battle anyway. So I'm not thinking that's the most ideal. At least that was my thought in the moment. I should still just do it to force him to use one of the Otherworld Dreams, to have to use it. And then even if he doesn't use the Otherworld Dreams, then I can, if he does use one of the Otherworld Dreams, then I only have to deal with one in the following turn, which is pretty helpful. So I play 4. I attempt to play the Faria here. It gets Otherworld Dreams, that gets canceled, so I'll go ahead and use the Misty Dragon. That also gets canceled with Otherworld. And so here's what I'm talking about. If I'd used the final forfeit on the final battle, would have forced him to try to use the, potentially use the Otherworld Dreams up, or make him spend more life to have to play the final battle again to be able to neg Ayu, which would have, again, put me in a much better position because he would have been more tapped out, and I probably could have made that play stick, and the Misty Dragon Spirit probably would have resolved, and then I would have had a much bigger creature that then stays safe, especially since he's already spent a final battle on it, and he's very low on cards. So at that point in time, I can just kind of play the waiting game, but then he plays this Neo Barrier Shadows and now has no cards in his hand after hitting me with the Grim, and then passes the turn to me, because he heteroclited that Nyarlathotep I had on the field. The Neo Barrier Shadows is pretty dangerous, especially considering how he's already at 7 stones. One more stone call means that Ayu can't discard a soul to be able to get extra damage, which puts me in a very weird spot. At this point in time, looking at the clock, knowing that we're already like 13 or so minutes into the game, I do have lots of card advantage on him, but at the same time I have to kind of play it safe, and I'm about to be kind of locked out, and he does have some RFG's cards for the Dark Tree. It probably would have actually just been smarter here to, at least within the next couple turns, just scoop and say, yeah, quick, we're thinking about time on the round, I gotta scoop, I have much more options in the sideboard against this list, I can move on, but instead I decided to push on for the sake of the video. So this is one of the important things about Ayu. She can close the game very fast, and she can potentially grind, but you still need to really watch in a GP setting about the time on the round. It's still an enemy to you. If you waste too much time in your game 1, even though you can close out games 2 and 3 potentially very quickly, you might not. So you can win game 2 and then just not have enough time to win the 3rd. So knowing when to scoop in game 1 is definitely a very important thing for Ayu players, especially in the Dark Tree matchup, because there are a lot of tools that you can play in the sideboard, like Priscia's Leap, that can really help push that match just way in your favor, and not all of the versions main it if you're not playing the like control variant, such as like Iron Miles from Onsel Gaming. Go ahead and say pass the turn here. Don't really feel like swinging. I could have easily just called for stone, but I didn't. I did judgment this turn because I wanted to put Ayu at least on the board to have something to deal with his Grim. Now at this point in time, his Neo Barrier is unsealed with 8 stones. I felt pretty comfortable doing the flip here, knowing that if he wanted to unseal the Neo Barrier, he would have had to call for stone, which then locks him out from one of his cards for the turn. Not being able to grab something from the RFG and gives me some more answers. He's going to attempt to play the Yigdor from his RFG, and I say, you know what, let's go ahead and say we're going to cancel it and make you have to pay 5 for it, put that card back in your hand. He says, sure, that's fine. You know, I kind of want to make him tap out, and then at that time, you know, if he wants to try to recast it, then he's in a much worse position. That was probably a misplay on my part. It's an unknown, and it's only a 9/9 as comparison to an unknown that's in his hand, which turns out to be a Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly, which would have been much better for me to cancel. He would have spent a lot of will to try to grab something out of his deck, and then had it final breezed, put back in his hand for sure, but then at the same time makes it so that he's just wasted a ton of will and potentially is even tapped out. Deciding how much to pay here for the Kaguya's Moonbeam. Decides to pay a total of 3 to grab a 2-drop. He can easily grab Rezard here and start kind of cycling his Rezards using the Rezard that's in his grave. And at this point, knowing my hand and seeing what's kind of in play and looking at the clock, knowing that this Moonbeam resolves is probably the moment where I say, let's just go ahead and go to game 2. I can't really deal with what I have on the board and how many stones with you just cycling Rezards forever. His 1 Rezard turns into 2, turns into 3 very quickly since he has 1 already in the graveyard, or already 1 in the graveyard and 1 in the removed zone. Should have just scooped the game here and gone to game 2, sideboarded into the options, and given myself tons of time to be able to win the match. Passes the turn instead of playing the Yigdor because he doesn't have the will for it. So it goes to me, you know, he has 1 card in his hand, he's got an Ayu. He attempts to swing, which again, probably isn't the best call. I probably should have just called stone, and then played that Samurai Spirit out onto the board to be able to deal with stuff, and then had the Otherworld Dreams to deal with any potential cards he brings out from his hand. Raise the 200 life after I try to do the Elixir's Fighting Spirit to have myself first strike, and I get to kill that Rezard. Now he's got an RFG Rezard, so he kind of, again, you see that cycle kind of coming down. Go ahead and decide to pay 3. Play the Melgus. It has swiftness, so I'll go ahead and try to swing in. Say maybe if you want to block with that Grim, it'll just die. Otherwise, I get a free damage because I'm trying to whittle down the deck. The Ayu deck does have burn spells in it, so potentially it gets pretty low. I can't access God's Art anymore because God's Art has an activate ability, and I'm prevented from using that by the Neo Barrier Shadows. So that's kind of a problem, especially since he's just at raw 8 stones now. And with only a few cards in his hand, 8 stones is perfectly fine. He can leave 2 will up every turn, still cast a 6-drop, and be able to grab something with Dark Tree whenever he needs it. The other card in his hand at this point is Final Battle, which is pretty good for him because he can wipe my board with just using primarily his stones, leave up options for Rezard to come back. He's going to go ahead and pay 5 and play the Yigdor, actually, which I think is an interesting decision. If that card in his hand is indeed a Final Battle, I probably would have used the Final Battle over the Yigdor. But he just wants to get it into the field, so if I happen to have a killed spell to try to deal with it, then he can just say, well, I'm just going to remove it and start casting it for cheap again. I think most tree decks should still at least run 1 Yigdor in them. It's a good card. It can put in a lot of work and be repetitive, and it's another card to make use of Rezard really, really nicely. I'll swing in for the 10. The hope is to have him bring back the Rezard again. He attempts to block, and I'll say, cool, well, I'll Fighting Spirit my Elixir, give it first strike again, and kill your Rezard, making you have to pay for it. The other thing that I could have done here, which probably would have been better, would have simply been allowed the trade with the Rezard. So then I could have used the Fighting Spirit here with the Melgus, which would have done 11 damage if he chooses not to block. I'm going to go ahead and play that Willful Samurai Spirit. Get it out there. I only have to pay 3 for it. The problem is here is I'm leaving myself tapped out. Even though I have that Otherworld Dreams in my hand, I'm not really getting to do much with it. I probably should have played the Lars instead, just to have another creature on board and to be able to support it with the Otherworld Dreams, so that if he did have a final battle, I can kind of really hard punish it. There's another Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly here. You see he does have that final battle, which is great for him. There. I can't tell he's flickering it so fast. So if I'd played the Lars instead, I would have had a creature on board. He plays this final battle. I could have Otherworld Dreamed it, and at that point his Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly could have been used to grab a 1-drop, and he would have spent a bunch of life, and I still would have kept all my creatures, and I would have been way ahead, and then I could have just played the Samurai Spirit the next turn. So again, I'm making a lot of misplays here as to how to deal with this grind. I'm not actually trying to outgrind him, which is a problem. I'm trying to get a little bit too greedy, and I'm not really playing smart with the cards I have in my hand. I'm not really thinking about Otherworld Dreams, honestly, going into my mindset, because of the fact that he can just grab stuff from the RFG. So I'm not really thinking about needing the cancels, but it's still smart to have it. I have flipped the Ayu to go grab a Spirit Bug. Primarily reason for that is I want to put a body on board and draw a card. Trying to refill my hand here a little bit. And now I'm like, you know what, just in case there's something else, I'm going to hold on to that Otherworld Dreams for a bit. It's going to bring back a Rezard at the end of the turn. My Ayu can deal with Yigdor. I've got Spirit Bug if he decides to swing in with the Rezard. 23 cards left in his deck. Pays 2, plays a Marsh, which at this point is practically worthless. Swings into the Rezard. I say, you know what, I'll take the Grand, or I'll try to trade with the Rezard here. He's going to pay 200 life, take him down to 900, and it will kill my Ayu. I'm still okay with that in the sense that, like, Ayu can just keep flipping, and every turn she flips is just another free card in my hand. I can start getting those, you know, like something like Lowly Spirit, kill it, Grieving Elf Spirit, potentially bring something back if I can get rid of the Rezard. Lots of different options here. Place the Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly, and I say, no, you're not going to get that much value. I'm going to Otherworld Dreams that at least to empty your hand back out again. Swings in with the Yigdor for the 9, and I say, sure, I'll take it. I'll go down to 24. Drop turn. I have a Sprinting Flame Horse. The problem is Inheritance is an activate ability, and I can't use it. If I'm wrong on that ruling, please someone correct me, but Inheritance is a form of activate ability, so with Neoberry on the field, I can't even use it, which is really unfortunate, because with what I have in hand, I'd be able to do a lot of damage, at least, and kind of mainly get the point to where I could potentially burn the game out. I could spend this turn playing Swiftness stuff with, like, Lars, and then Blood Boil, and deal a lot of damage that way, or like this turn I could use Flip Ayu, give her Swiftness, and deal a bunch of damage, and then kind of block, and then next turn use Lars to Blood Boil and do all kinds of silly things could potentially happen to close out the game. I have the Grieving Elf Spirit here. I'm pretty safe, thankfully, from too much final battle action. I'll play the Grieving Elf Spirit, attempt to bring back a elf, and he'll attempt to bring back a guy, and he will just RFG it. So I am still saying that I'm going to try to grab the Misty Dragon Spirit, even though I've already used Release, because that would be what I would grab. It pays 200 life to RFG it in response with the Rezard. Yeah, there's just a lot of grinding here, and it's just very difficult for me to kind of close out the game. I'm getting greedy by trying to use the time here. it really is just better for me to have just scooped and moved on with the post sideboard cards. Ayu is definitely a deck, having played it for a little while, that you really want to practice. While the Oops OTK is definitely a thing, you have a deck of 40 cards, so you very much need to be mindful of your deck list and what you have, and what options you have in a situation, and when to play certain cards. I'm finding especially the mulligan to be very specific. He's going to grab that res art at the end of his turn. Obviously, he wants to put on pressure. Swings with me on the res art on his turn. Has the 1 card in hand. Leaves up a couple blockers, which is fine for him. Has a Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly again. Just keeps getting those utility cards for himself, which have been really excellent for him. If it had been any other card, then potentially if he taps out here, he could have just died. But he happens to top deck very nicely with that Kage's Moonbeam. Playing at a GP when you have a time limit, this is just kind of an interesting something to kind of note. When you're playing at a GP with a time limit, you don't want to hold out hope. You don't play out a game because you have hope that you might get it out. You want to play to the solids in your list. You want to play to your sideboard. You want to play to the clock. So if you are falling behind in a game, and you just feel like you can't get back, rather than be like, well, I have a hope of a chance that maybe I can top deck the card I need to win, you shouldn't put yourself in that position. It leads you to get a lot of draws, which are very suboptimal in your record. It leads you to get really mad at yourself when you realize you could have won, but you just ran out of time, or, you know, lots of other things. So you need to just focus on practice being on the clock. It's definitely something I recommend players do. Practice being on a 50-minute clock. He grabs the Dark Alice here. Reason why is because now he's completely cut me off from my graveyard. Any form of potential recursion just in one burst. And then he gets to go get a big creature. He did do Kage's Moonbeam for 3 just in case he decided to grab Melgus. Machina, but he decides instead, I see the Dark Alice, I've already paid for it, I'm going to go ahead and grab the Dark Alice because the Moonbeam does says X or less. So he decides to leave up all these blockers, passes the turn to me. In pretty bad shape here. Drew into another burn spell, I believe. He's got so many creatures here, and I'm so low on life that my thought is, well, I'll just play a bunch of creatures as well to try to make it so that I don't die. But he's going to be able to get to grab another creature with Dark Trade this turn, so there's really just nothing that I can do with my 4 will. Realizing I should probably scoop the game, but I'm saying I'm going to try to match some things, maybe see if I can push through a play with this Blood Boil, get him down low enough, make something happen off of it. Play the Sprinting Flame Horse and the Lars, just to match him creature-wise. Have the Nameless Mist here. Nothing really to steal out of his hand. So I'll go ahead and kind of leave up. The other thing about Ayu is you can't really bluff things. You're only singletons. So he saw that my Otherworld Dreams is gone. I don't have another one. It's impossible. So there's no reason for me to kind of leave that will up. There's no real 1-drop I could potentially have. I've already used my Sword Strike as well. Heteroclite Excalibur is not instant speed. There's just a lot of things going wrong here. He was able to grab that Arla at the end of the turn. Hits me for 7 in the air. And there's just a lot of stuff coming at my face. I'm 1 turn away from being killed here, very simply. And he grabs Blood Spray, so he gets to draw 2 cards and then mill himself 3 cards. Very quickly hits some stuff to the RFG, takes himself down to just over like 18. I think it's like 18 or so cards. Pays 2 to play the Abdul, like just jamming all these creatures that just kind of really set the lock on his side of the field. He's got so many more creatures than me. Plays the Machina as well. Both the cards he grabbed off the Blood Spray he can just play, and it's just too many creatures. There's just no way. You see I have a Blood Spray and a Lightning Helix in my hand. Sorry, not Lightning Helix. I do this every time. It's Crimson Ray. Crimson Ray in my hand. So I have 12 damage worth of burn here. I'm going to swing it, and then I'm going to try to do some just silly stuff. Maybe I can get some jank. So I try to swing in with the 2. He says, okay, I'm going to kill it with Arla, take myself down to 5 life. Which is the smart thing to do, because if he had let it connect, that would have been bad. Because any 2 cards gone is just 2 cards gone. I'm going to swing for him for 1. My thought was that if I could potentially make it so if those 2 guys had connected, if he hadn't killed with the Flame Horse, he actually almost let me connect. If I had connected with the Spirit Bug and the Flame Horse, I actually could have just dropped both burn spells and killed him for 12 damage. He's smart, and so he decides to pay the 2 life to kill it. But at the same time, if that had happened, that was like my miracle out, and it just doesn't work. So I'm going to try to swing everything in, see if maybe something is allowed to connect. Nothing's ever allowed to connect. He blocks with everything. Swinging with the Ayu, blocks with the Rezard, it dies, and I go, okay, cool. So now that we're done with all that, I'm going to go ahead and burn you for 12 and scoop the game, because there's nothing I can do. So because they would put it out of 2 cards. If that Flame Horse had connected, it would have been lethal, which would have been hilarious, but ultimately, you don't bank on those things. You need to remember to scoop when the time is right. So moving into game 2, both of us have done some sideboarding here, trying to remember exactly what cards to pull out. Ayu deck sideboarding is very weird, because all your sideboard is singletons. You have 15 single cards that you have to keep track of. I am going to be on the play. Hopefully this turn can be a little bit better. Almost missed my beginning of the game draw trigger there. Happened to draw the Magic Crest of Darkness, which is great for me. I only have 1 creature in my hand that he can scorn, which is the Sleepy Cat Spirit. The rest of my cards are recursion and cancel spells and stuff to search my deck, which is pretty good. This is kind of the stuff that I'm looking for against Dark Tree. Again, I'm realizing that probably in this game my best bet is not to put that early game pressure in terms of damage, but to put that early game pressure in terms of advantage. And not really necessarily worry about hitting him too much, but instead force him to be out of cards and then put him in a position where he just can't come back. Especially knowing that I had sideboarded in the Priscia Sleep. Play the Magic Crest of Darkness, bring back my Sleepy Cat Spirit, say, okay, you can go ahead and pass your turn. Calls for his stone, hits that Heaven's Rift. Now he has access to being able to play his lots of different things. He can play Release, he can play whatever. Plays the Rezard. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I'm not terribly concerned about the Rezard. I hit another, at least because there's nothing in my grave at this point. I'll play 1. To play the Voyage to the Floating Isle. Reason for this is because it's an excellent way to be able to bring your Misty Dragon Spirit to hand without having to flip. And then you can focus on flip searching for the other Soul Resonators. And having that, you see in my hand I have the bounce spell to be able to deal with Rezard and a Severing Winds. So my thought is that like I can try to make some plays here where if he tries to play a discard spell, I can bounce his Rezard back, and then when he tries to play the Rezard, I can Severing Winds it, is the thought line for being able to stop him from getting my Misty. Plays the Scorn of Dark Alice, as I knew was coming. In response, I'm going to go ahead and try to put his Rezard back into his hand. Goes back to my hand. He hits the Misty Dragon Spirit. I know that's what he's going to grab. He's trying to get that out of the way as fast as possible, because the only card in his deck that can deal with it is Arla, or is the Final Battle. I try to Severing Winds it. He Severing Winds me back, so we happen to have the Severing Winds to deal with it. That's just something that can happen. Cancel Wars are a thing in this game. You definitely have to be careful with it. But I made him use a Severing Winds on a Severing Winds, which actually feels pretty good. And then all I lost up was a Misty Dragon out of it, which is not terrible. Again, because I'm not trying to play this like super aggressive game. And so I'm more focused on trying to grab just general advantage, and if I can make him waste those cards in his hand, when I'm not really trying to pressure him with bodies on board necessarily, and more just trying to outgrind his hand, it's pretty good. Every card I make him waste is a plus for me. Play the Sylvia mainly to have a blocker to serve against his Rezard. Passes the turn to him. Calls for a stone. plays a Nameless Mist. Main reason for the Nameless Mist is because he wants to make his Rezard's also big and potentially rip some cards out of my hand. I think about Final Breezing it here, but there's really no point in Final Breezing it because it puts it back in his hand and then he can just recast it and steal my other spell. It doesn't do anything. I don't really it's not worth it. So I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and let that Nameless Mist resolve. My Sylvia is still bigger than you can take whatever you want. He does decide to take the Final Breeze, which is a little sad, but at the same time is not earth shattering. Uses that Heteroclite Excalibur on the Sylvia, pays the 5, gets it RFG'd. Again, making him use another card. I'm like, sure, that's fine. Plays that Neo Barrier, which is a little bit of a problem. Swings in for 6 damage off the Rezard, puts me at 34. He's pretty low on stones though, so the only way for him to unseal it is to play Dark Alice. So at this point, if I can get Ayu and kind of get some momentum going, then I'm definitely in a pretty good shape. Also, entering that Rezard right now while it's tapped would be amazing, but I need a creature with swiftness to be able to deal with it. I'm going to go ahead and decide to do Judgment here. Now, with the play I could make here with him being tapped out and only having 2 cards is I could search for Spirit Bug, grab Spirit Bug, play Spirit Bug, and then use the Blood of the Mikage on Spirit Bug. So I draw a card, use Blood of the Mikage, kill the Rezard, Bug dies, Rezard dies. I got to draw a card off of it. And then I have Ayu sitting on the board saying, ha, you don't have access to a Rezard, you don't have access to RFGing my graveyard, I can get back on top, essentially. And if you are going to final battle, you're only going to lose 1 card, and at the same time, you know, you're only going to kill the one thing, and it has imperishable, so it just comes right back. So I'll go ahead and pass the turn here, though. I decided to grab that Samurai Spirit. With the amount of stones I have, I'm thinking maybe if I just kind of put more creatures on board, things that have Pierce and stuff like that, higher attack, I can start to deal with the Rezard should he try to tap out or things, at least until I can try to make the Neo Barrier not a problem. Plays a Faria here. This is actually a really excellent card. Right now, at this moment, I could technically OTK him. So with Faria, it means that I can't, because she prevents the first damage that would be dealt to her every turn. This is a pretty good board card. If he is maining it, it's a little bit weird. And then even better, he plays the Amonsville. This is an excellent card. It's a very good anti-Ayu tech. It makes it so all of your Resonators have reach, technically, to be able to block flyers, which puts him in a very good spot, especially with Faria. She can just fly, prevent the damage to herself that Ayu could deal, and then even if Ayu could deal 2 attacks with like Chrysia's Leap, Faria just prevents that damage too. Ayu having Pierce kind of prevents that a little bit, but still at least the other attacks he could still just fly up and block them anyway. The end of his turn I flash into Melfi, mainly because I wanted the ramp access. And having the creature that potentially has precision is pretty good to be able to deal with things like Rezard or Faria when he's kind of forming a blocker wall. See, I have that Elixir's Fighting Spirit, which again is very good for me. I'm not trying to kill him at this point. The strategy here is I am way up on card advantage. He's only got the 1 card at a time. I can put this pressure on him to the point where he can't do anything. So I'm actually just going to call Stone with Ayu. He can't possibly kill me. And I can gem that Valorous Tiger Spirit. Valorous Tiger Spirit is very good, actually. Just by itself. It's a 4-drop 12/10 with Precision. Precision is a very, very important skill sometimes in these grindy matchups. Being able to deal with their blockers, especially something as bad as Faria or his Dark Alice that he can just kind of recover to get that unsealed, are definitely things that I want to try to deal with. And as well, if he wants to try to kill it, he has to spend a lot of will just to be able to kill it with the final battle as well. He can't tap the Faria to attack, primarily because the Valorous Tiger Spirit can block it, and then next turn my Valorous Tiger can really push him. He's actually going to play the Dark Alice from his hand. I have no creatures to RFG, so it is just a basic 5/5. But he has the Faria to be able to protect the Dark Alice, which is pretty decent. There's, you know, a lot of different ways to kind of try to get around it with what I have in my hand, but being able to protect that Dark Alice and unseal so that I don't have access to something like the God Art. In response, actually, to him playing it, I'm actually going to go ahead and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and God Art while I can. And this is another thing that I want to talk about with the importance of Ayu. So I actually kind of messed this up here a little bit, and I'm actually glad I did because I can talk about it. You have to know your deck to use this God Art. You mainly shouldn't use it as a tech tool. You should use it as a win the game button, but even in that case, you need to know what your deck is. I actually start to go and call release, because my thought is I'll exile the mirror card, which is what I really want to grab, play to get the release. Next turn I can play the release, and then on my turn, I can play the release, get the mirror back, and draw an additional card. If I had called release here because I actually had sideboarded it out for some reason, I would have milled my whole deck and cost myself the entire match. You need to know your deck to play Ayu. You have 140 singletons. You need to remember what you sideboarded out, what you sideboarded in. It ends up kind of backfiring for me, though. I don't lose a ton of cards, which is great, but then his other card in his hand was Jelaca, so he can search for the Nameless Mist and then just make me discard that spell, and then use Rezard, pay 200, and RFG it, so I can't use Remnant. So I can't pop the Neo Barrier edition. Excellent call. It actually could, though, end up kind of coming back to bite him, simply because now he has 0 cards, no draw power. I've got lots of cards. I've got a guy with precision, and I can just kind of start picking off his cards. He puts the 1/1 counter on Faria, which I think is pretty smart. I'm going to attempt to kill the Dark Alice with my precision guy. Says I'm going to block it with Faria. Thinking about it anyway. He miscalled what I was trying to swing at here. I was trying to swing at the Dark Atlas. He thought I was swinging at the Faria. Chooses to block with the Faria in response so that my guy doesn't die. So it might have been a misplay there. My stat mine might have been off here. Maybe my Tiger Spirit is supposed to be dead. I forgot about the +1/+1 counter. If I should have used the Elixir's Fighting Spirit to pump up the Valor's Tiger Spirit so it didn't die. Unless the Valor's Tiger Spirit's a 12/12, at which point it doesn't matter. So pardon me if that is a misplay there. I'm going to try to swing in to the Faria with Ayu. He says, sure, that's fine. And I'm just like, well, so that Ayu doesn't die, I'll use the Fighting Spirit. Make it so that I have no... I have that first strike, and now I'll follow up with you have an empty hand. I'll play that Willful Samurai Spirit. So I have got a lot of different creatures on board that are bigger than his, and I have the ability to try to start pinging stuff off, and I'm not going to let you draw cards or make your Rezard more powerful. He top decks pretty poorly here. He hits another Neo Barrier of Shadows, which doesn't do anything for him. He's at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stones, but I've kind of just given up on trying to OTK, so actually Neo Barrier at this point is not a terrible loss. I'm just kind of there. I'm not super concerned about it. Having a second one in his hand, though, definitely doesn't help him. My board state is far superior to his, and I can spend the next turn really just pinging all of his stuff to death. Using Valor's Tiger Spirit to pick stuff off. This is kind of a more routine look of what Ayu kind of wants to be doing against Dark Tree. Ayu can change gears very fast. Ayu's deck can change gears very fast. And so that's what I've done here. I said, well, you know what? You're kind of go for the Neo Barrier route, so I'm just going to jam a bunch of creatures and push your face in. That way, just pick all your stuff off the board and then just swarm you rather than OTK you, so that Neo Barrier isn't helping you at all. This is just something that Ayu is naturally good at. Is turning that corner, and it takes a lot of practice to figure out the build and figure out exactly what you want to do here. I'm actually just going to go ahead and kill the Rezard. Don't care about the Dark Alice. He gets to 8 stones next turn, or 8 next turn easily, so I'm like, I don't really want to deal with that. He blocks with the Jelaca instead, so I get to just move that out of the way. I'll go ahead and do Blood of the Mikage on the Melfi to give myself precision, and I'm actually going to use that to swing into the Rezard. My thought here is that trying to kill the Rezard forces him to say, well, maybe I'll save it with my Dark Alice. Okay, well then Dark Alice is dead, and I unseal the Neo Barrier, at least for a turn. All in all, it's exactly what I wanted to have happen. He's left with just Dark Alice, which is just a generic 5/5, and isn't going to help him at all because he's about to unseal. He has no cards RFG'd and only one card in hand, and I'm sitting at 3. I have a couple Resonators in my hand, but I actually choose not to do anything with it. And now that I've got a clear board, I say, you know what? Let's try and hit you for at least a little bit of damage off the Samurai Spirit and see, especially since you already have a tapped Dark Tree, so we're not actually going to be giving you anything. We do hit a Rezard there, but he can't use it this turn, so he has to decide next turn. Is he going to try to hit that 8th stone, or is he going to try to bring back the Rezard? Play that Gate of the Silver Key, so that just in case if he does final battle me, I can say, you know what, moving on. We'll flip Ayu for very cheap. I thought about playing the other Resonators in my hand, but at this point I'm like, well, if he has final battle, I don't want to play these, so then I can follow it up with re-establishing a board, and then I'm going to go ahead and swing in with the Ayu here, taking a huge chunk of his deck along with him. And thankfully, I don't hit a single Resonator with that hit of 10. It's just 10 utility cards, 10 spells, nothing to pump up Rezard, and no additional Rezards to grab. We're kind of trying to track his total amount of cards here at the end of the turn. I'm still debating whether or not to play the Lars, and I go, you know, I think I'm going to go ahead and hold off again, just in case he happens to top deck Final Battle. Got him down to 27 cards, which feels pretty good. The other thing, too, is if he tries to use Gate of the Silver Key, or destroy Gate of the Silver Key, I could then just make him discard the other card, which still has a lot of value there. I think it might cost 4. If I'm wrong there, I apologize. Decides to call for that stone, so I'm safe from his RFG for another turn, which feels excellent. He's got an Amaterasu's Foresight there in his hand. He's like, oh, I'll play the other Neo Barrier. It doesn't really do anything. Then I top deck into Otherworld Dreams, which putting him at 1 card is great, because if he has some kind of way to deal with it at this point, I can't grab a card from his RFG. He's only got 1 card in hand, so I can Otherworld Dreams it, and I can just swing everything through. So that was a very lucky top deck with the Otherworld Dreams there. It just pretty much essentially guarantees the game here. I could also make him discard that card with Gate of the Silver Key, see that it was Amaterasu's Foresight, force him to discard it, and then just tap for stone. Not necessarily as ideal, but it at least is something. Having the Otherworld Dreams, though, essentially guarantees me the game here, though, because I can kill his Dark Alice with the Precision, and then everything else can just swing through, and I have a Swiftness guy in my hand, and the Elixir's Fighting Spirit in the grave, which I can still use for Remnant, and easily get rid of 26 remaining cards in his deck, and force him to deck out at the start of his turn, which is how you kill Tree. So I'll swing with the Valorous Tiger Spirit to kill the Dark Alice. Play the Lars. I'll say swing in. He attempts to cast the Amaterasu's. I cast the Otherworld Dreams. Everything else swings in, swings in, swings in, swings in. Cast for the Elixirs, and he says, yeah, that's well more than 28 cards. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next game. So that ended up working out really great for Tree again, or for Ayu. Again, that's kind of the way Ayu wants to go, is it wants to pick whichever direction Tree is thinking about going and then pick the opposite direction. Whether they're going for a swarming route, you just kind of OTK them. Whether they're going for a defensive route, you kind of hold out your cancel and then try to put all your eggs in one basket with like Priscia's Leap. Or if they're going for this kind of lockdown route with Dark Alice and Neo Barrier, then you kind of go wide and force them to kind of rely on being able to draw cards, which Tree's not very good at, and if you're not fueling their RFG, it's significantly worse for them. Drawing that first card for turn. Calls that first stone. It's a Shadowy Light. Doesn't have a first turn play. Call for my first stone. Hit a Deep Wood. Play my Ayu Special Power Medicine, which is excellent because now if I do Judgment, I get to ramp a stone. Gate of the Silver Key, when combined with Ayu's Power Medicine, like I said before, is very, very good. I'm going to go ahead and call for stone here. Say pass. Not really gonna do anything. Hits another Gusting Skies on, or sorry, Black Silence on his side of things. Plays that Neo Barrier. Doesn't really do much now, but at least wants to get it there just in case. Because he can also try to play that Dark Alice, which you're actually going to see him do here. He's going to use the Swamp to quickly slam down that Dark Alice by getting a second stone recovered. I'm not sure if that's the right call. It's pretty early and pretty unprotected, but at the same time, I could potentially see it working out. I get that Ayu special magic possession stone, which is great because I happen to top deck that Crimson Ray to kill the Dark Alice, getting it off the board. No gain life because of tree, but then it's also just gone, and I can say pass, making him use a card while I just continue to sit on advantage. I do have access to be able to cast a cancel spell if he wants to try to scorn me, like exactly like he's doing right now. I say, you know what, I've only got a couple things. I've got a lot of recursion here, and I've got a cancel spell still in my hand and a way to get my Resonator back. Not terribly too concerned about it. Hits the Misty Dragon Spirit, which is pretty obvious. Has the Rezard, so all 3 games here, Misty Dragon's not going to see any kind of play. He's going to pay the 2 life to exile the Misty, go down to 38. That's kind of the first hurdle for Tree, is getting rid of Misty Dragon. It is a very, very strong card. For any deck, really, the first hurdle is to get rid of Misty Dragon Spirit, because for Ayu, it just becomes a massively good win condition. End of his turn, I'm going to go ahead and kill the Rezard. Look, all 5 cards are different. I'm going to use that Sword Strike. Stuff gets sent to the bottom of the deck, sending all the spirits to the bottom. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to shuffle a lot anyway, but there you go. Saying, well, he's pretty behind here. I get to ramp with Ayu Special Magic Stone. I'm going to go ahead and use my coin to do Judgment, along with my Heart's Core, ramp into another stone, turn into a Power Stone. So I have 2 5-color stones and a green stone. Get to go grab a spirit, such as the Willful Samurai Spirit, which is excellent. Get that Pierce option. Still have way more card advantage than him. I'm at 7 cards to his, I think 2 or 3 at this point. Haven't removed any cards for him for the RFG, so Tree is essentially worthless. The Neo Barrier Shadows can't really do much. Got access to a cancel spell. It's a Gusting Darkness here. Got another Neo Barrier Shadows, which again is not really doing him much unless I hit my stuff to cancel it, or to remove it, destroy it. Plays the Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly to grab a 2-drop. I'll say I'll Millennia Bond it. I'll get to draw a card off of it. Woo! Uses his thing, says, okay, well, I've got a second one. So I can't cancel that. I don't have a Severing Winds, but he gets to go grab a 2-drop, which is most likely going to hit a Dark Alice. Thankfully enough, though, I don't have any creatures to RFG, so it's just a 5-drop. And you see that I have the Lightning Strike in my hand, which is exactly what I want. So now I can just kill that Dark Alice and run train on him next turn. If I had a bunch of souls, I could potentially OTK him, but he doesn't have enough cards in his... he still has so many cards in his deck that there's no way possible for Ayu to hit him for that much damage. Again, trying to be cautious here, make him waste his resources so that eventually he just can't keep up. Drop for turn. During the upkeep, I'll cast that Lightning Strike, get rid of the Dark Alice here. Does have that Severing in his hand. Not terribly concerned. I want that card off the field. And again, if I can get stuff to get killed, I'll play... I can make him waste cards in his hand while I just generate more advantage. That's good for me. Attempt to play Hestia. Hestia is a sideboard card that I brought in order to grab Kaguya's Pictorial Scroll. This is really good because if he decides to try to kill Hestia with like a final battle, Pictorial Scroll gets to come in and it's essentially draw 3 cards. He uses the Severing Winds to cancel it because it is the second card. I'll play my Magic Crest of Darkness, which I've been holding on, and just bring Hestia back to my hand. And then I can use Ayu to call Stone. So again, I'm setting on 5 cards to his 2 after his draw. Feeling very safe right now. If he does decide to kill my Ayu in some way, shape, or form, then I can just Judgments and get another Stone and continue to ramp, while also just putting that continual pressure and making his cards practically useless. Top decks into an Arla, decides to play it just so he has a blocker, just in case. I'm thinking here about, what do I try to God's Art for? I can God's Art. And then I'm like, well, if I use Priscia's Leap, but then I top deck Priscia's Leap, which actually feels really, really good. And I have 3 souls in my hand here. But I'm trying to do some math about like how big I can make Ayu. She's currently a 12/12 because of Power Medicine. And the card in his hand is unknown, so it might be something I can't cancel. Now, if he does try to play an Amaterasu's Foresight with only 1 card in hand, as the only card in his hand, and I had Otherworld Dreams, then I'd feel pretty safe, because I could just cancel it, he can't do anything else, my bunch of attacks resolve, everything's good. But I have to keep a careful mind here because of how much will I'm plugging into Priscia's Leap, to be able to still successfully Otherworld Dreams it. Because if I get super close, but don't kill him, Tree can come back. My goal here is to make it so Tree does nothing until he is dead. I don't want to RFG anything from his deck for him until he is dead, making him a very clunky deck that he can't do anything with, and just pushing him into a position where he's just stuck. So I'm trying to do the math here right now, seeing how much damage Ayu can do. Should be a 27/27 with Pierce. And because of the Arla only being able to do 2 attacks with Priscia's Leap to be able to keep up will for Otherworld Dreams, in case that's an Amaterasu's Foresight, it's not what I want to do this turn. If the Arla wasn't there, then it wouldn't be a problem, because then all my swings would go through and I'd just keep hitting him over and over and over again, and the Pierce damage would be more than enough. The problem is the fact that he has a blocker in the form of Arla. So I say, you know what, I'm going to wait 1 more turn. I'm going to wait just a little bit more, get that extra will here, and try to make it so that I can push through. Hit my Dark Depths Stone. Try to decide exactly what I want to resolve here. I'll pay 2 for Sylvia. The reason why I'm playing the Sylvia here is so that next turn I can just lock out the Arla. You'll see me play it here in just a second when I realize the order to play here. Sylvia comes in. Reason why is because next turn I want to lock out the Arla, just making it so he can't have a blocker at all. Then pay 3. Hestia comes into play, again, setting up a good board state so that if he decides to try to do Final Battle and rip things up, Hestia, I think her name's Hestia, she can bring in the Pictorial Scroll from my hand, and I get to draw 3 cards, in a sense, because 3 cards get RFG'd, and as long as that Pictorial Scroll's in the field, I can cast them. So the idea here would be to make his Final Battle have at least the least amount of value to him as possible. So if he did happen to top deck a Final Battle here, it would essentially be, yeah, I get to kill 2 things, 3 things, one of them has Imperishable, and he also just I gave him 3 cards. Seems like a pretty big neg, especially when you have to pay a bunch of will and some life to be able to kill me. Plays the Amonsville, so that if he does bring something back with Tree after I make my big swing in, he can block with it. And it says the only other card in my hand is a Neo Barrier, but I'm going to try to bluff it, see what comes out of it. I'll draw for turn. Get a burn spell here, it's pretty nice. Could easily just use that burn spell just to hit Arla for a little bit of damage or hit him, but again, I want him to be I want this play to be as safe as possible. So I'm going to do here is I've counted all the cards. He's got those dice on the top of his deck to represent. I'll use Priscia, swing in for 6, and lock out the Arla from being able to stop him. He chooses not to pay the life, which I think is interesting, probably because maybe he wants to try to grab another Arla off of it or something else like that with the tree. 6 damage from Sylvia goes through. I do hit 2 Rezards in there as well as the Severing Winds. paying 5 to play the Priscia's Leap on Ayu, which will let her swing 3 times, and she doesn't have to tap to do any of her swings. And then I'll dump 3 spirits into her, making her a 27/27 with Pierce. And at that point he says, yeah, I don't even have the card anyway, so it's just over at that point. So huge thanks to Trey, but actually we're going to take some footage here of Trey and show you what exactly he sideboarded out. Deck profile for Ayu will be up later this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, this is GMO73 signing off. So what did we pull out? What did we put in? This is out, this is in. So we pulled out those cards. Ooh, you went down to 2 final battles.
Yep.
And then put in those to kind of help stop it down and pull me out stuff.
Yep. The big thing is they should be them, honestly.
Yeah,
okay. Just testing out different texts.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, sweet, thanks. Huge thanks to the patrons of the channel. You see their names on the screen here, some of them, and the rest are down below in the description for their support of the channel and the content. If you want to get a chance to get your name in the screen here and access to our private Discord server, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon by clicking that little P on the screen. Thanks so much. See you next time.